At the restaurant, Nico stood in the center of that circle of judgment. 5 men waiting for his answer, waiting to see if he'd kill to prove loyalty to old methods, waiting to see if the waitress had destroyed him. He thought about his father, about swift action and early graves, about 20 years of building power through fear and immediate consequences, about the empire he'd created and the reputation that made men cross the street to avoid him. Then he thought about Elena, about questions that made him think strategically, about patterns she saw that no one else noticed, about 3 weeks of conversations that sharpened his mind instead of dulling it, about the fact that his recent decisions had been more effective, more profitable, more sustainable than anything he'd done in the previous 3 years. You want proof I'm still capable of violence? Nico looked at each man in turn. I could kill someone right now. Walk out of here with blood on my hands and my reputation intact. But that would prove your point, not mine. Then what's your point? You think mercy is weakness? I thought so too. But I've made more strategic decisions in 3 months with Elena's counsel than in 3 years of ruling by fear. She didn't make me soft. She made me smarter. And if you can't see the difference, you don't deserve to sit at this table. Nico walked toward the door, didn't wait for permission, didn't wait for a vote, just walked out of a meeting that would determine his future in a world he'd helped build. Behind him, one of the 5 men spoke. If he chooses her over us, he's out. And we make an example of why that was the wrong choice. Nico heard it, kept walking, got in his car, drove back to the apartment where Elena waited, except she wasn't waiting. He found the note on the table, read it 3 times, each time hoping the words would change. They didn't. For the first time in 20 years, Nico Santoro lost his composure entirely, picked up the table and threw it against the wall, shattered glass, broke furniture, destroyed the room while looking for any clue about where she'd gone. His phone rang. Tommy. Boss, they voted. You're out. Effective immediately, and they've put 50,000 on the girl's head. Every hustler and amateur in Chicago will be looking for her by morning. They want to prove a point about what happens when you choose wrong. Nico stopped destroying furniture, went very still. How long do I have? Words already spreading. You've got maybe 6 hours before every street corner has eyes looking for a girl matching her description. 6 hours to find Elena in a city of 3 million people. 6 hours before she became prey to everyone who wanted to prove the old guard was right. 6 hours to save the person who'd saved him. Nico grabbed his keys, started making calls, because if Chicago's underworld wanted to see what he was capable of, they were about to learn that strategic thinking was considerably more dangerous than rage ever was. Nico found her in St. Anthony's, a small church on the south side where nobody asked questions and the doors stayed unlocked 24 hours. Eleanor sat in the back pew with her head bowed, not praying, just breathing, trying to figure out how to survive in a city that suddenly had a price on her existence. She heard footsteps on old wood, knew who it was before looking up. Nobody else walked with that particular combination of confidence and controlled violence. You shouldn't be here, she said quietly. Neither should you. Nico sat down beside her, not too close, left space between them like he was afraid she'd run. You left. I had to. They were going to force you to choose between me and everything you've built. I made the choice easier. By making yourself a target? $50,000 is on your head. Every desperate person in Chicago will be looking for you by sunrise. Elena's breath caught. 50,000? The old guard wants to prove a point, that choosing mercy over tradition has consequences. That, I made the wrong call. Nico turned to look at her. They're right about one thing. There are consequences, but they're wrong about everything else. You lost your position because of me. Lost your reputation, your power, everything you worked 20 years to build. I didn't lose anything I want to keep. Elena shook her head. You'll resent me. Maybe not today. Maybe not next month. But eventually you'll wake up and realize you gave up an empire for a waitress who told you to eat your vegetables. You think that's what happened? You think I traded power for you? Nico moved closer, close enough that Elena could see the exhaustion around his eyes. I didn't lose power, Elena. I lost the chains and move. What are you talking about? My father built his empire on fear. I inherited it. Spent 20 years maintaining it. Every decision filtered through one question: what would make people more afraid of me? And it worked. I had power, had respect, had control over territory and operations and people's lives. He paused. I also had a phone that wouldn't stop ringing at 3 a.m. with problems that needed immediate violence. Had enemies multiplying faster than I could eliminate them. Had men around me who were loyal out of fear, which means they were loyal until someone scarier came along. That's how your world works. That's how it worked. Past tense. Nico took her hand. She didn't pull away. 3 weeks of talking to you changed something. You asked why people betray, why they steal, why they make the choices they make. Those questions forced me to think past the immediate solution, forced me to see patterns instead of problems. And when I started leading strategically instead of reactively, everything improved. Fewer casualties, more profit, stronger loyalty. I became more effective by being less brutal. The old guard doesn't see it that way. The old guard is dying. Literally. 3 of those 5 men have health problems. 2 have successors waiting for them to retire or die. Their way is ending, whether they admit it or not. Nico squeezed her hand. I didn't lose power. I lost the obligation to rule through fear. That's not the same thing. Elena wanted to believe him, wanted to think that her intervention 3 weeks ago had created something better instead of something broken. But hope felt dangerous when $50,000 was hunting you. They put a price on my head. They put a price on their own obsolescence. They're about to learn that. Before Elena could ask what he meant, the church doors opened. Bruno walked in, moving fast. His face carried something Elena had never seen before. Relief mixed with urgency. Boss, you need to come back. Now. I'm not leaving her. Bring her. She needs to see this too. 20 minutes later, Nico's car pulled up outside Valenti's private dining club. The same steel door Elena had walked through every shift for 6 months. The same unmarked entrance that led to a world she'd tried to stay invisible in. Tonight, the dining room was packed. Not with the 5 old men who'd voted Nico out. Not with the traditional power structure that had ruled Chicago's underground for decades. But with faces Elena recognized from the periphery. Younger men, the operators who did the actual work while old men made decisions in closed meetings. Tommy stood at the center of the room. When Nico and Elena entered, everyone went quiet. We heard what happened, Tommy said. His voice carried to every corner. Heard the council voted you out. Heard they put a bounty on Elena. Heard they think choosing strategy over violence makes you weak. Nico said nothing. Waited. They're wrong. We've watched you lead differently these past 3 months. Watched casualties drop while profits rose. Watched you negotiate solutions instead of creating bloodbaths. Watched you build something sustainable instead of something that requires constant violence to maintain. Tommy looked around the room. The old way is dying. We've watched you lead with your head instead of your fists, and we've thrived. We're with you. The room erupted. Not with violence, with affirmation. 40 voices speaking at once. Loyalty declared through words instead of fear. Bruno stepped forward. The council thinks they can remove you and install someone else. They underestimate how many people prefer strategic leadership to impulsive brutality. We've been talking quietly, building consensus. You're not out, boss. You're just leading a different coalition. Eleanor watched this revolution happen in real time. Watched the old power structure get replaced not through violence but through defection. Men who'd been waiting for permission to do things differently now had it. Nico turned to her. You didn't make me weak. You made me smarter. And intelligence attracts better people than fear ever did. Over the next week, the shift became permanent. The old council found their orders ignored, their threats empty, their power evaporated because the people who executed their decisions had chosen a different leader. Nico's reputation evolved, not as the most brutal, as the most strategic. Word spread through Chicago's underground that the smart operators worked for Santoro. That calculated moves paid better than body counts. That loyalty built on respect lasted longer than loyalty built on terror. Eleanor became known not as Nico's weakness, but as his advantage. The pattern reader, the question asker, the person who made better decisions possible by forcing thought before action. The $50,000 bounty disappeared, not because the old council cancelled it, because nobody would collect it. Taking out Elena meant declaring war on the new power structure. Nobody was that stupid. Restraint became the new power play. The old way of immediate violence got replaced with strategic patience, and the men who'd voted Nico out found themselves increasingly irrelevant in a world that had moved past them. Revolution happened quietly, without shots fired, without bodies dropped, just a shift in who people chose to follow and why. 6 months after the quiet revolution, Valenti's private dining club looked the same from the outside. Same steel door, same lack of signage, same guards who never smiled. But inside, everything had changed. The dining room still filled with dangerous men making dangerous deals. Money still changed hands under tables. Power still concentrated in conversations spoken too quietly for outsiders to hear. But the violence had decreased. The body count had dropped. Negotiations replaced bullets more often than not. Nico Santoro still controlled the South Side, still commanded respect and fear and loyalty. But the foundation had shifted. Fear, built on respect, lasted longer than fear built on brutality. People stayed loyal because the work was smarter, because calculated moves paid better, because leading with strategy instead of rage meant everyone survived to profit another day. Eleanor no longer wore the black apron of a waitress. She sat at the table beside Nico during meetings, not as decoration, not as weakness, as the person who saw patterns nobody else noticed, who asked questions that prevented mistakes, who'd become indispensable not through force but through insight. Tonight felt familiar in dangerous ways. A shipment had gone missing. $30,000 worth of product vanished somewhere between the port and the warehouse. The man responsible sat across from Nico with sweat beading on his forehead. His name was Kevin, 26 years old. 3 years with the organization. No history of theft or betrayal. But the shipment was gone. Someone had to answer for it. The old Nico would have already made the call, would have decided Kevin's fate while hungry and angry and certain. The new Nico had learned to pause, to breathe, to think before acting. He felt the familiar tightness in his jaw, the urge to solve problems with immediate consequences, the voice of his father whispering that hesitation kills kings. Then he felt Elena's hand on his arm. Gentle, grounding. She stood, walked to the kitchen, returned with a plate, set it in front of Nico without saying a word, just looked at him with those eyes that had stopped 3 murders 6 months ago with 5 words. Nico looked down at the plate. Steak, medium rare, roasted vegetables, the meal he'd eaten twice a week for years, the meal he'd learned to finish before making decisions that couldn't be unmade. He picked up his fork, cut a piece of meat, chewed slowly, let the act of eating create space between rage and action, between instinct and strategy. Kevin watched this happen with visible confusion, probably thought he was witnessing his last meal, didn't understand that the act of Nico eating meant Kevin might survive the night. After 3 bites, Nico set down his fork, looked at Kevin. Tell me what happened. Everything. Start from when you picked up the shipment. Kevin's story came out in a rush. He'd picked up the shipment on schedule, loaded it into the truck, started driving to the warehouse, got pulled over by police 3 blocks from the port. They'd searched the truck, found nothing because Kevin had hidden the product in a compartment, but the search took 20 minutes. When Kevin got back in the truck, he realized he was being followed. Different car. Not police. He'd panicked, taken side streets, lost the tail. But in the chaos, he'd missed a turn and ended up in the wrong neighborhood, had to circle back. By the time he reached the warehouse, someone had broken into the truck while he'd stopped at a traffic light. The story matched the police report Tommy had pulled, matched the traffic camera footage. Kevin hadn't stolen the shipment. He'd been targeted because someone knew his route, knew his schedule, knew exactly when to strike. The old Nico would have killed Kevin for losing the product, would have made him an example, would have ruled through fear and immediate punishment. The new Nico asked different questions. Who knew your route? Just Tommy and the dispatcher. Who knew the police would pull you over? Kevin went pale. Nobody should have known that.
Exactly. Someone set this up.
Used you as bait, wanted me to kill you so I wouldn't ask these questions. Nico looked at Tommy. Find out who called in that traffic stop. Find out who knew Kevin's route. We have a bigger problem than missing product. Elena spoke for the first time. And Kevin? Kevin did his job under difficult circumstances. He's fine. Nico turned back to Kevin. You're suspended for a week. Paid. Take time off. When you come back, you're on different routes, with different schedules. Whoever targeted you thinks you're dead. Let's keep it that way. Kevin left looking like he'd been granted a reprieve from execution, which he had, just not the kind he expected. After the room cleared, Elena sat down across from Nico. Your father would have killed him. My father died at 43. I'm 41. Every day I outlive him is proof that his way wasn't the only way. Nico reached across the table, took her hand. You saved 3 lives that first night. You've saved dozens since. Not by stopping me from killing, by teaching me to think before I do. I just reminded you to eat. You reminded me that power doesn't come from the fastest trigger. It comes from the clearest mind. And the clearest minds are fed, rested, and calm. Eleanor smiled. Small, real. The kind of smile that came from knowing you'd survived impossible odds and come out stronger. You're learning. I had a good teacher. Their relationship had evolved into something neither could fully define. Not quite romance. Not quite partnership. Something between strategy and affection. Between respect and need. They shared a bed sometimes. Shared decisions always. built something that worked because it was honest about what it was and wasn't. Eleanor had gone from invisible to indispensable, from prey to partner, from a girl who disappeared into rooms to a woman who commanded attention without saying a word. The city's most dangerous men waited for her to finish speaking before they acted, not because she threatened them, because she made them smarter. Tommy burst through the door, didn't knock. That meant emergency, boss. We've got a problem. Detroit's making moves. They think the change in your operation means you're weak. They're pushing into Southside territory, testing boundaries. 6 months ago, this news would have sent Nico into immediate action, would have triggered violence and retaliation and a body count that accomplished nothing except proving brutality. Tonight, Nico looked at Elena. She looked back. Neither spoke. Didn't need to. 6 months of conversations had built a language without words. Nico turned to Tommy. Set up a meeting. Neutral location. I want to talk to Detroit before anyone starts shooting. They might see that as weakness. They might, or they might see it as confidence. Either way, we talk first. Act later. Nico stood, helped Elena to her feet. And Tommy? Make sure they know Elena will be at the table. If they're smart, they'll bring someone who can match her. If they're stupid, they'll come ready for violence. We'll know what we're dealing with before anyone fires a shot. Tommy left to make the call. Nico and Elena stood alone in a dining room that had witnessed 6 months of transformation, where fear had been slowly replaced by strategy, where immediate consequences had been traded for calculated moves, where the old way of ruling had died quietly so something better could grow. Eleanor looked up at Nico. Detroit could be a problem. Detroit could be an opportunity. We'll figure it out. He smiled, genuinely. Together. Some kings rule by fear, others rule by fire. But the smartest ones? They rule by knowing when to eat first and kill later, if at all. But he didn't come for what Elena feared he'd come for. Didn't make demands. Didn't expect anything except conversation. He'd sit in the chair by the window. She'd stay on the couch. They'd talk. At first, the conversations felt forced. Nico would ask questions about her day. She'd give short answers. Long silences would stretch between words. But gradually something shifted. Nico started talking about decisions he needed to make, not details, never names or specifics, just frameworks, a business partner who might be skimming, a deal that felt wrong, a territorial dispute that could escalate. Elena would listen, then she'd ask questions. Why would he skim if he's making good money legitimately? What makes the deal feel wrong, the terms or the person offering them? If you escalate, who benefits? If you don't, who gets emboldened? Simple questions that forced Nico to think past his first instinct, past the immediate reaction, past what his father would have done. By the 3rd week, these conversations had become routine. Nico would arrive. They'd talk. He'd leave around midnight. Elena would lie awake wondering how her life had become this strange negotiation between survival and something she couldn't name. Tommy noticed the change first, brought it up during a morning meeting about territorial boundaries on the south side. You're different lately, Tommy said. Sharper, more patient. 3 weeks ago, you would have responded to the Hernandez situation with force. Yesterday you negotiated, got a better deal without firing a shot. Nico had smiled, said nothing, but he knew where the shift came from. Elena didn't know his business, didn't understand the mechanics of what he did, but she understood people, understood patterns, understood that most problems had solutions that didn't require violence if you were willing to think past the immediate satisfaction of breaking something. The organization noticed. Casualties dropped, profits rose, loyalty strengthened because people respected calculated moves more than reactive ones. Nico's reputation evolved from dangerous to strategic, from feared to respected. But rumors spread like smoke through the city's underground. Nico Santoro was being controlled by a woman. A waitress had tamed the wolf. He'd gone soft because some girl whispered in his ear at night. The rumors reached Sal Corvino in the warehouse where Nico had been working off his debt. Corvino heard the stories. Heard how a nobody had influenced a man who'd almost killed him. Heard how that nobody lived in a protected apartment with minimal security because Nico thought she was safe. Corvino started planning. Not revenge against Nico. That was suicide. But revenge against the girl who'd convinced Nico that mercy was strength. That was achievable. That would hurt Nico in ways a bullet couldn't. Inside the apartment, Elena stood at the windows watching the city lights. 3 weeks of being visible had taught her something she'd spent 23 years avoiding. Being seen was exhausting. Every moment carried weight. Every word mattered. Every decision had consequences that rippled beyond herself. She missed being invisible, missed the freedom of existing without consequence, missed knowing exactly who she was because nobody else was paying attention. Behind her, the door opened. 3 knocks. Right on schedule. Nico stepped inside. He looked tired tonight. Lines around his eyes that hadn't been there 3 weeks ago. Tension in his shoulders that told Elena something had gone wrong. Bad day? She asked. Long day. There's a difference. He moved to his usual chair. Stopped halfway. Do you ever regret it? Speaking to me that night? Elena turned from the window. Every single day, the honesty made him flinch. I can't undo it. Can't send you back to being invisible. I know, that's what I regret. Not the speaking. The knowing I can never go back. Nico crossed the remaining distance between them. Stood close enough that Eleanor could smell his cologne. Close enough that she had to tilt her head back to meet his eyes. You saved 3 lives, he said quietly, including your own. That has to count for something. I traded invisibility for survival. Some days I'm not sure which one I needed more. Something shifted in Nico's expression. Something vulnerable that didn't belong on the face of a man who built empires on fear. He reached up, tucked a strand of hair behind her ear. His hand lingered against her cheek. Elena. She knew what was coming. Saw it in the way he looked at her, in the way his breathing changed, in the careful way he touched her like she might break. He leaned down. She turned her head. His lips grazed her cheek instead of her mouth. I can't, she whispered. Nico pulled back. Hurt flashed across his face before he could hide it. Why not? Because you don't want me. You want someone who makes you feel human. Someone who reminds you that there's more than violence and strategy and building kingdoms on other people's fear. Elena stepped away, created distance. That's dangerous for both of us. Because the moment I become something you need, I become something your enemies can use. You're already something they can use. Then don't make it worse by making me something you love. The word hung between them. Love. Neither of them had said it before. Now it filled the room like smoke, impossible to ignore. Nico opened his mouth to respond. The door slammed open. Bruno burst in, gun drawn, phone in his other hand. His face was pale. Boss, Corvino's making a move. He's got Elena's family. Elena's legs gave out. She hit the floor before Bruno could catch her. The room tilted sideways. Her sister's name came out as a sound she didn't recognize as her own voice. Anna. Nico crouched beside her, his hand gripped her shoulder. Where is she? Bruno held up his phone. Corvino sent a message. He wants Elena, says he'll trade the sister for her. Gave us an address. 2 hours to comply, or the girl disappears. We burn him down tonight. Nico stood, already pulling out his phone. Call Tommy. Get everyone. I want 20 men at that location in 30 minutes. We go in hard. We end this. No. Nico stopped dialing, looked at Elena like she'd spoken a language he didn't understand. No, his voice was dangerously quiet. Elena pushed herself to her feet. Her hands were shaking, but her voice steadied. That's exactly what he expects. That's the trap. He knows you'll come in with force. He's counting on it. Your sister is in danger. I'm not playing strategy games with her life. Neither am I, but rushing in is how people die. You taught me that. Elena grabbed his arm. Corvino wants you angry, wants you reactive. He knows you've changed. This is him proving you've gone soft. If you give him the violence he expects, he wins even if he dies. Nico's jaw tightened. Every instinct in his body screamed for immediate action, for overwhelming force, for the kind of response that would make Corvino regret being born. But Elena's words from 3 weeks ago echoed in his skull. Decisions made on an empty stomach. Decisions made in rage. Same problem. Same mistakes. What are you proposing? Use his expectations against him. Make him think he's won. Draw him somewhere public. Somewhere he feels safe. Elena's mind raced. He wants me. Let him think he's getting me, but on our terms, our location. Tommy arrived within 10 minutes. Bruno had already pulled up maps of the city. They gathered around Elena's kitchen table like it was a war room, which it was. Corvino's smart enough to avoid your usual spots, Elena said. He'll expect a trap at any location connected to you, so we choose somewhere neutral. Somewhere public enough that he thinks you won't risk exposure, but controlled enough that we have the advantage. The warehouse district, Tommy suggested. Near the port. Lots of buildings. Easy to surround. Too obvious. He'll have counter-surveillance. Eleanor looked at the map, saw patterns the way she'd learned to see them. Empty glasses, tense shoulders, exits people needed before they knew they needed them. Here. The old manufacturing plant on Archer Avenue. It's been abandoned for 2 years. Public record says it's slated for demolition. He'll think it's neutral ground. And it's not? It's owned by a company your organization controls. You have keys, access, layouts. He doesn't know that. Elena met Nico's eyes. You tell him I'll meet him there, alone. Let him think he's calling the shots. Meanwhile, you're already inside. Waiting. Nico studied the map, studied her. This could go wrong in 50 different ways. So could charging him with guns. At least this way, we control more variables. The plan came together in 20 minutes. Bruno and Tommy would position teams around the building. Nico would be inside with 3 men. Elena would walk in alone, wearing a wire, drawing Corvino into the open. The part Elena didn't say out loud. She'd be the bait. The thing Corvino wanted. The vulnerability he thought he could exploit. As the men prepared to move, Elena's composure finally cracked. She sat at the table with her head in her hands, shoulders shaking. This was her baby sister. Anna was 19, taking classes at community college, working part-time at a bookstore. She had nothing to do with this world, nothing to do with Nico or Corvino or any of the choices Elena had made. Nico dismissed everyone from the room, sat down beside her, didn't touch her, just sat close enough that she could feel his presence. I will get her back, he said quietly, and Corvino will wish I'd killed him that first night. That's a promise. Elena looked up. Her eyes were red but dry. If anything happens to her, it won't. But if it does, then I'll spend the rest of my life making sure Corvino regrets every second of his. Nico's voice carried absolute certainty. But it won't come to that. Your sister will be home tonight, alive, unharmed, whatever it takes. 2 hours later, Elena walked into the abandoned manufacturing plant alone. The building smelled like rust and decay. Her footsteps echoed on concrete. The wire taped to her ribs felt like it was burning through her skin. I'm here, Corvino. Her voice carried through the empty space. Let my sister go. Lights flooded on, temporary work lights that Corvino must have brought. Anna sat tied to a chair in the center of the room. Tape across her mouth. Terror in her eyes. But alive, breathing, whole. Relief hit Elena so hard she almost stumbled. Corvino stepped out from behind a support column. He looked thinner than she remembered. Hungrier, desperate in a way that made him more dangerous than confident. You actually came, alone. Thought Santoro would have sent his whole army. He doesn't know I'm here, Elena lied. Right. And I'm supposed to believe that? Corvino pulled out a gun. Not pointed at Elena, pointed at Anna. Where is he? Probably tearing apart the city looking for me. I left while he was planning your execution. Corvino laughed. Sharp, bitter. I almost believe you. The great Nico Santoro brought down by a waitress. They'll write songs about this. Let her go. Take me. That was the deal. The deal was showing Santoro that his weakness has consequences. Corvino's finger moved toward the trigger. The doors burst open. Not with armed men. With police. 20 officers in tactical gear, lights, sirens. Chaos that came from every entrance simultaneously. Behind them, Nico walked in with his hands visible. Empty. No weapons. Just a man who'd made one phone call to people he'd spent years building relationships with. Favors called in. Promises made. The legal system weaponized better than any bullet. Corvino's gun dropped. Federal agents read him his rights. Something about trafficking. Racketeering. Evidence that Nico had been collecting for weeks while Corvino thought he was free. Anna was safe, crying. Elena held her sister while police took statements. As they led Corvino away in handcuffs, he turned back, locked eyes with Nico, shouted loud enough that everyone heard. You think you've won? Everyone knows your weakness now, Santoro. She made you soft, and soft men die. Remember that when they come for her. When they all come for her, you chose mercy. They'll choose bullets. The threat hung in the air long after Corvino disappeared into a police van. Nico stood in that abandoned factory, watching Elena hold her sister, and realized something that terrified him more than any enemy ever had. He'd chosen law over violence, strategy over satisfaction, the system over the street. Elena had changed him, and in his world, change was the most dangerous thing you could admit. The meeting was called 48 hours after Corvino's arrest made the evening news. Federal charges, police involvement, a Mafia figure taken down without a single shot fired, the kind of publicity that made everyone nervous. Nico received the summons at dawn, a formal request that felt more like a subpoena. The 5 families who controlled Chicago's underground wanted an audience, wanted explanations, wanted to know why one of their own had chosen courtrooms over corpses. The meeting took place in a restaurant that had been closed for renovations for 6 months. No renovations were happening. Just empty tables and chairs arranged in a circle like a tribunal. 5 men who'd built their power on blood and fear, sitting in judgment of someone they considered compromised. Nico walked in alone. No Tommy, no Bruno. Just him and the weight of accusations he couldn't fully deny. Across town, in the apartment on the 14th floor, Bruno stood outside Elena's door with his phone pressed to his ear. He listened, made a decision that would probably get him killed. Opened the door without knocking. "You need to hear this." Elena looked up from the book she wasn't reading. "Hear what?" Bruno held out an earbud. "The meeting. Boss doesn't know I'm streaming it, but you should know what they're saying about you." "About him." Eleanor took the earbud. Put it in. Heard voices she didn't recognize discussing her like she was a virus that needed to be cut out. "Nico Santoro has become a liability," one voice said. Deep. Rough. The kind of voice that came from decades of cigars and hard decisions. He let Corvino live. Changed a kill order because a waitress told him to eat his dinner. Then he calls in the police to handle his problems? That's not how this world works. Another voice. Younger, sharper. He's compromised. The girls made him weak. Everyone sees it. If we let this stand, every man in our organizations will think they can question orders, think they can choose mercy, think they can involve law enforcement in our business. A third voice entered. Calmer, more measured. Nico's been effective for 20 years. His recent decisions have been profitable. Casualties are down, heat from law enforcement is minimal. Maybe his methods are evolving. Evolving or deteriorating. The first voice again. There's a difference, and we need to know which one we're looking at. Elena heard Nico speak for the first time. His voice was controlled, measured, but she could hear the tension underneath. "I made a strategic decision. Corvino, alive and terrified, sends a stronger message than Corvino dead. The federal charges mean he'll spend 20 years in prison watching his empire crumble. That's a longer punishment than a bullet. But you made that decision because of a woman. I made that decision because it was smarter than the alternative. Prove it." The first voice again. Hard, unforgiving. Kill someone. Right now. Show us you still have the stomach for this work. Or step down and let someone with actual strength take your place. The silence that followed felt like a held breath. Elena pulled out the earbud. Her hands were shaking. She knew what came next. Knew what they were demanding. Knew that Nico's choice would determine everything. He could kill someone to prove his ruthlessness, could distance himself from her publicly, could go back to being the man who ruled through fear instead of strategy, could save his reputation and his power, or he could stand by the transformation she'd caused, could defend his choices, could lose everything he'd built because he'd learned to think before shooting. Either way, she was the problem, the weakness, the vulnerability that his enemies would exploit forever. Elena stood up, walked to the desk, found paper and pen, wrote 5 sentences that hurt more than the car that had nearly killed her in that alley. "You taught me that being seen is worth the risk. Now let me go so you can survive. I'm not worth losing everything. Thank you for 3 weeks of protection. I'll take my chances invisible again." She left the note on the table, grabbed her coat, walked past Bruno, who was still listening to the meeting, and didn't see her slip out. The building had a service elevator. Elena had memorized its location during week 1, had planned exit routes the way she'd spent her whole life planning how to disappear. She took the elevator down, walked out through the loading dock, into a city that was suddenly bigger and more dangerous than it had been 3 weeks ago. Instead, he'd crushed his phone. The rage felt cleaner than thinking, felt righteous, felt like the only possible response to betrayal this deep. His father had taught him that anger was fuel. Use it, let it drive decisions. The man who acts fastest survives longest. His father had also died bleeding out on a warehouse floor because he'd walked into an ambush fueled by rage instead of planning. Nico was 13 when he watched his father die. Old enough to understand what happened, too young to do anything about it. His father had discovered a betrayal, made a decision in fury, walked into a trap because anger made him sloppy, made him predictable, made him dead. The man who raised Nico had taught him to act swiftly. The man's death had taught him to think clearly. 2 lessons that contradicted each other. 2 philosophies Nico had spent 20 years trying to balance. Swift enough to maintain fear, strategic enough to avoid traps. Tonight he'd leaned toward swift. The order was given. Tommy was already moving. The machine was in motion. Corvino would die because betrayal demanded blood. That's how this world worked. That's how it always worked. But Elena's words kept playing in his mind, on a loop he couldn't silence. Decisions made on an empty stomach always cost more blood than they need to. Nico looked down at his plate. He'd been staring at this steak for 20 minutes before that phone call. Hadn't eaten anything all day. A working lunch that never happened because of back-to-back meetings. Coffee for breakfast. Nothing since. He'd ordered the hit while hungry, while angry, while compromised by both. His father's voice echoed from 2 decades ago. Hesitation kills kings. The moment you know there's a problem, you eliminate it. Questions come later. Action comes first. But his father died at 43. Died because he acted without thinking. Died because rage felt more satisfying than patience. Nico was 41 now, 2 years away from his father's expiration date. 2 years to prove he'd learned something from watching that man bleed out. Elena stood 3 feet from his table now, eyes down, hands clasped in front of her. Every line of her body language screamed discomfort, that she'd come back when he called. That took something, courage or stupidity. Possibly both. She looked terrified. She should be. Most people who interrupted Nico's decisions didn't live long enough to regret it. But she'd said something that landed like a knife between his ribs. Something true. Something he'd been trying to ignore for 20 years, while building an empire on the foundation his father's death had taught him to question. What if swift action was sometimes the wrong action? What if rage made you predictable? What if killing Sal Corvino tonight sent a message, but keeping him alive sent a stronger one? Nico cut another piece of steak, put it in his mouth. The meat had gone lukewarm, but he could taste it now. Pepper, garlic, salt, flavors he hadn't registered before. His mind felt clearer. Not calm. He'd never be calm about betrayal, but clearer. Sharp edges instead of blunt force. Sal Corvino deserved to die. That wasn't in question. But did he need to die tonight? Did his brother need to die at all? What if there was a way to make this betrayal cost Corvino more than his life? What if fear could be weaponized better than a bullet? Questions his father never asked. Questions that might have kept his father alive. Nico looked up at Elena, really looked at her. She was small, maybe 5'4" inches. Dark hair pulled back in a ponytail. Plain features that wouldn't stand out in a crowd. The kind of face you'd forget 5 minutes after meeting. Except he'd never forget her face now. Never forget the moment this unremarkable waitress walked across an empty room and stopped 3 murders with 5 words. Why did you say that? Elena kept her eyes on the table between them, not on his face. Never on his face. That felt too intimate, too dangerous, like looking directly at the sun. Because I've watched you for 6 months, she said quietly. You never eat before making decisions. People always pay for it. The silence that followed felt heavy enough to crush her. Elena could hear her own heartbeat, could hear the hum of the kitchen refrigerators through the wall, could hear absolutely nothing from the man sitting 3 feet away. When Nico finally spoke, his voice carried something she couldn't identify. Surprise, maybe. Or something close to it. You've been watching me. Not a question. A statement that demanded explanation. Eleanor's fingers twisted together. Not watching. Noticing. There's a difference. Explain the difference. Watching means paying attention to a person. Noticing means seeing patterns. I notice when your water glass is empty, when the room gets tense before anyone speaks, when someone needs their check before they ask for it. She paused. I noticed you never finish your meals before meetings. That's not about you. That's about what hungry people do. Nico leaned back in his chair. The leather creaked under his weight. Sit down. I'd rather stand. That's not a request. I know. Eleanor kept her voice steady even though her legs felt like water. But sitting at your table changes things. Makes me part of something. I'm just a waitress who brought you food at a bad time. You're considerably more than that now. Nico gestured to the chair again. Sit. Eleanor remained standing. Respectfully, no. Whatever you need to say to me, you can say it while I'm on my feet. For 3 seconds she thought she'd gone too far. Thought she'd used up whatever luck had kept her alive this long. Then Nico did something unexpected. He smiled. Small, brief, but real. Smart, he said. Sitting at my table would make you complicit. Standing keeps you separate. Standing keeps you separate. You've thought about the optics. I've thought about survival. Same thing in my world. Nico picked up his wine glass, found it empty, and set it back down. Tell me what else you've noticed. Elena's mind raced. This felt like a test, the kind where wrong answers had permanent consequences. Your jaw tightens before you make phone calls. You roll your shoulders back before bad conversations. The room goes quiet when you go quiet, like everyone's holding their breath. And you leave your meals unfinished before meetings in the back room. How many times have you seen that pattern? Every time you've been here. At least 40 times over 6 months. Nico's expression shifted. Something crossed his face that looked almost like respect. 40 times. My own people don't track my habits that closely. They're not paid to refill your water glass. I am. Watching plates and glasses means watching people. Elena hesitated, then continued. I don't know what you do. I don't know who you are, beyond a customer who tips well and orders the same meal twice a week. But I know hungry men make bad decisions. I've watched it my whole life. Your father? The question landed like a physical blow. Eleanor's breath caught. How did you? You said you've watched it your whole life. That means family, father or brother. The way you said it suggests father. Nico's eyes never left her face. Am I wrong? Elena shook her head slowly. He worked double shifts at a factory, came home exhausted, skipped meals, yelled at everyone, made decisions that hurt people. My mother, my brother, me. All because he was running on empty and too proud to admit it. And you think I'm like your father? No. Elena's response came faster than she expected. I think you're smarter than him, which means you know better, which means tonight was different. You were angry about something big enough to skip eating. That's when people make choices they can't take back. What makes you think I want to take anything back? You're still sitting here. You're still eating. If you'd already made up your mind completely, you would have ignored me. The accuracy of that statement hung in the air between them. Nico's phone sat on the table, screen shattered but functional. He could make a call right now, could confirm the order he'd already given, could end this conversation and everything that came with it. Instead, he asked another question. Hypothetically, if someone betrayed me, stole from me, sold information about my operations to people who want to destroy everything I've built, what would you do about it? Elena's stomach dropped. This was real, not hypothetical. Someone had betrayed him tonight. That's what the phone call was about. That's why the room emptied. That's why 3 lives hung in the balance. I don't know your world, she said carefully. Pretend you do. What would you do? Elena thought about her father, about all the times he'd lashed out in anger and regretted it the next morning, about bridges burned that could have been repaired, about relationships destroyed that might have survived with different choices. I'd ask why they did it. Nico's eyebrows rose. Why? People don't betray someone without a reason. Maybe they were desperate, maybe they were scared. Maybe someone pressured them. Maybe they're stupid. Elena met his eyes for the first time since sitting down, but killing them right away means you never find out. And if you don't know why they did it, you can't stop the next person from doing the same thing. You think I should let betrayal go unpunished? I think there's more than one way to punish someone. Dead men can't be afraid. Living men can. Living men can tell stories about what happens when you cross you. Dead men are just dead. Nico stared at her for a long moment. Then he picked up his phone, pressed buttons on the cracked screen, held it to his ear. Someone answered on the first ring. Tommy, Nico said. Change of plans, bring Corvino here. Alive, both of them. A pause. Eleanor could hear muffled protest from the other end. I don't care if you're already there. Bring them here. I want to ask questions before I make final decisions. Another pause. Because I'm telling you to, that's reason enough. He ended the call. Set the phone down, looked at Elena with an expression she couldn't read. 3 lives, he said quietly. Sal Corvino, his brother, and yours. That's what your 5 words brought tonight. Elena's knees felt weak. Mine? You interrupted me, questioned my decision. That usually ends badly for people. Nico stood up from the table. He was taller than she'd realized. But you were right. I made that call angry and hungry. 2 things that make men sloppy. My father died being sloppy.
I prefer not to follow his example.
Elena took a step backward. I should go. Yes, you should. She turned toward the kitchen door, made it 5 steps before his voice stopped her. I never asked your name. She looked back. Elena. Elena Ruiz. Elena Ruiz. He repeated it like he was memorizing it. Thank you for the reminder about eating first. I'll remember that. Elena nodded, turned again, walked toward the kitchen with her heart hammering against her ribs. She'd survived, somehow, against every probability. She'd spoken to Nico Santoro and lived to walk away. She pushed through the kitchen door and let it swing shut behind her. In the dining room, Bruno emerged from the shadows near the bar. The head of security moved like a man built from concrete and bad intentions. He approached Nico's table with the confidence of someone who'd earned his position through violence and loyalty. Boss, Bruno said, voice low, you countermanded a kill order in front of a waitress. Word spreads fast in this business. They'll say you're going soft. Nico looked at the kitchen door where Elena had disappeared. Then he looked at Bruno with eyes that held absolutely no softness whatsoever. Let them say it. Anyone who thinks mercy is weakness can test that theory personally. We'll see how that works out for them. Elena arrived at Valenti's the next morning to find Gianna smoking outside the steel door. The older woman never smoked before shifts, said it dulled her sense of smell, made it harder to read rooms. But she stood there now with a cigarette burning down to her fingers, staring at Elena like she was looking at a ghost. You changed a kill order, Gianna said. No greeting, no preamble. Do you understand what that means? Elena's stomach tightened. I brought him food. That's all. You spoke. He listened. That's never happened before. Gianna took a long drag, exhaled smoke into the cold morning air. Word travels fast in this world. By midnight, everyone knew Nico Santoro countermanded an execution because a waitress told him to eat first. I didn't tell him to do anything. You think that matters? Gianna dropped a cigarette, crushed it under her heel. You changed the power structure, made him question a decision he'd already made. Half the people in his organization think you made him look weak. The other half think he's evolving. Either way, you're the reason they're talking. Eleanor felt cold despite her coat. I was trying to help. I know, that's what makes you dangerous. Gianna opened the door to the club. Silent girls survive, Elena. You stopped being silent last night. Now you're something else entirely. I hope you're ready for what that means. Inside, the club felt different. Eyes followed Elena as she walked to the staff room. Conversation stopped when she passed. The kitchen staff who usually joked with her went quiet. Even the dishwasher, who never looked up from his work, tracked her movement across the room. She'd become visible, exactly what she'd spent 6 months avoiding. Across town, in an office above a legitimate shipping company that served as a front for considerably less legitimate operations, Tommy Ricci sat across from Nico with a file folder open between them. They're calling you soft, Tommy said. No inflection. Just facts delivered by a man who'd been Nico's right hand for 12 years. Corvino's alive. His brother's alive. People are asking questions. Nico didn't look up from the papers he was signing. Let them ask. It's more than questions. Corvino's talking. Says you've lost your edge. Says a waitress runs your decisions now. Says any man who listens to a girl serving drinks isn't a man who should be making moves in this city. Sal Corvino is alive because I chose strategy over satisfaction. His fear is worth more than his corpse. Anyone with half a brain can see that. Not everyone has half a brain, boss. Some people only understand force. They see mercy as weakness. They see you changing a kill order as hesitation. Tommy closed the folder. And hesitation kills kings. I know. My father taught me that right before hesitation got him killed. Nico finally looked up. My father acted on rage, made predictable moves, died in an ambush because everyone knew exactly how he'd respond to betrayal. I'm not repeating his mistakes. So what are you doing? Something smarter. Corvino's alive, but he's terrified. He knows I could have killed him. He knows I can still kill him any time I want. That fear makes him controllable. Dead men can't be controlled, can't be used, can't spread the right kind of fear. Tommy considered this. And the waitress? What about her? She's the reason you're having this conversation. She's the reason Corvino's breathing. People see that as vulnerability. Nico's expression went cold. Then people are welcome to test that theory. I'll demonstrate exactly how vulnerable I am. 4 blocks from the club, Elena left through the back exit at the end of her shift. The alley behind Valenti's smelled like garbage and old cooking grease. She'd walked this path every day for 6 months, knew every pothole, every shadow, every sound. Tonight felt wrong. She heard the engine before she saw the car, heard it rev, heard tires squeal against asphalt. Elena turned and saw headlights bearing down on her. No time to think, only time to move. She threw herself sideways, hit the brick wall hard enough to knock the air from her lungs. The car missed her by inches. She felt the heat of the engine, smelled burning rubber. The vehicle didn't stop, didn't slow down, just kept going, tail lights disappearing around the corner. Elena slid down the wall, legs shaking too hard to hold her weight. Her shoulder throbbed where she'd hit brick. Her palms were scraped raw from catching herself, but she was alive. A door opened behind her. Bruno stepped into the alley, gun already drawn, eyes scanning for threats that had already disappeared. You hurt? Elena shook her head. Couldn't trust her voice yet. Common move. Can you stand? She tried. Her legs gave out halfway up. Bruno caught her with one arm, steadied her like she weighed nothing. Come on, he said. Boss needs to see you. I'm fine. I just need... That car wasn't an accident. Someone just tried to kill you. You're coming inside whether you like it or not. Bruno half carried her back through the service entrance, past the kitchen where staff suddenly found reasons to look away, down a hallway Elena had never walked before. He knocked on a door at the end of the hall. Didn't wait for an answer before opening it. Nico's private office looked nothing like the club. No dark wood. No leather. Just a desk, filing cabinets and windows overlooking the Chicago skyline. Nico stood at those windows with his phone pressed to his ear. He turned when Bruno entered. His eyes went to Elena, to her torn coat, scraped hands, the way she was leaning on Bruno for support. He ended his call without saying goodbye. What happened? Someone tried to run her down in the alley. Black sedan, no plates I could see. They were waiting for her shift to end. Nico crossed the room in 4 strides. He took Elena's face in his hands, tilted her head to check for injuries. His touch was surprisingly gentle for hands that had done terrible things. Are you hurt? I'm okay. Just shaken. Who did this? I don't know. I didn't see the driver. Nico released her, turned to Bruno. Find that car. Find who was driving it. I want names by morning. Already on it, boss. Bruno left. The door clicked shut. Elena found herself alone with Nico, in a room that suddenly felt too small. This is my fault, she said quietly. No, this is the price of people thinking I've gone soft. Nico moved back to his desk, pulled out a chair. Sit down before you fall down. Elena sat. Her legs were still trembling. Someone wants to prove a point, Nico continued. They think killing you will show I've lost control, will demonstrate that my decisions can be questioned, that I'm vulnerable. Then let me go. I'll leave Chicago. Disappear. You'll never see me again. Too late for that. You're already a target. Running won't change it. Nico sat on the edge of his desk. I can protect you, will protect you, but protection in my world comes with conditions.
What conditions?
You belong to me, not as property, as someone under my protection. That means you live where I say, go where I approve. Accept security I assign. You lose your freedom to keep your life. Elena's throat felt tight. And if I refuse, then you're prey. And prey doesn't last long in Chicago. The choice was no choice at all. Accept protection and lose everything that made her invisible. Refuse and die in an alley trying to stay free. Elena looked at her scraped palms, at the torn fabric of her coat, at the man who held her survival in his hands. How does this work? The apartment sat on the 14th floor of a building Nico owned through a shell corporation. 2 bedrooms. Modern kitchen, windows overlooking Lake Michigan, the kind of place Elena could never afford on a waitress salary, the kind of place that felt more like a gilded cage than freedom. Bruno stationed himself in the hallway outside, never left his post, never questioned why he was guarding a girl who served drinks for a living. Elena unpacked the single bag of belongings she'd been allowed to retrieve from her studio apartment. 3 changes of clothes, toiletries, a book she'd been reading. Everything she owned fit in one bag, everything she'd been fit in even less space now. She didn't accept protection because she trusted Nico Santoro. She accepted because the alternative was dying in an alley, and she'd worked too hard to survive her childhood to give up breathing now. The first week felt like house arrest. Bruno drove her everywhere, watched every entrance, checked every room before she entered. She couldn't go to her classes at community college, couldn't visit her mother, couldn't exist outside the parameters Nico's world allowed. The second week, Nico started visiting. He'd arrive around 10 o'clock at night. Never earlier, never later. Would knock 3 times, wait for her to answer, then step inside like he owned the place, which he did. Technically, the shy waitress knew she'd signed her death warrant the moment she opened her mouth. But Eleanor Ruiz crossed the abandoned dining room anyway, stopping 3 feet from where Nico Santoro stood with a crushed phone in his palm and murder in his eyes, and said the 5 words that would either save 3 lives or end hers. Eat first, kill later. The tray had been trembling in her hand 60 seconds earlier. Elena watched from the kitchen doorway as the music died mid-note. The piano player's fingers froze above the keys. Conversation stopped as if someone had cut the audio in a film. Then came the chairs, one scraped back, then another, then 10 more in a cascade of wood against marble that sounded like dominoes falling in reverse. Nobody ran. Running drew attention. These people knew better. They simply stood, placed their napkins beside half-finished plates, and walked toward the exit with the practiced calm of people who'd rehearsed this evacuation 100 times in their minds. Glasses of wine sat abandoned mid-sip. A woman's lipstick print still marked the rim of a champagne flute. A man's cigar smouldered in a crystal ashtray, smoke curling upward into nothing. 90 seconds. That's how long it took for Valenti's private dining club to empty completely. Elena had worked here for 6 months. 6 months of serving people whose faces she deliberately forgot the moment they left her section. 6 months of perfecting the art of being so unremarkable that even regulars couldn't pick her out of a lineup. That's what made her good at this job. That's what kept her alive. The club had no sign outside, no windows, just a steel door in a Chicago alley that most people walked past without noticing. Inside, the dining room looked like it belonged in a different era. Dark wood panels, leather booths, chandeliers that probably cost more than Elena made in a year. The kind of place where cash changed hands under tables and conversations happened in whispers. Eleanor had learned the rules fast. Never make eye contact with the man in the back room. Never ask questions. Never remember anything you see or hear. The silent girls survive, Gianna had told her on her first shift. The curious ones disappear. Tonight felt wrong from the moment Nico Santoro answered his phone. Elena had been refilling water glasses in the far corner when she saw his entire body go rigid. His jaw tightened. The tendons in his neck became visible. He crushed the phone in his fist like it was made of paper, and for 3 seconds the only sound in the room was the cracking of glass and plastic. Then everyone started moving. Now Elena stood alone in a room that had held 40 people moments ago. The air still smelled like expensive cologne and cigars. Somewhere, a fork clattered to the floor. The sound echoed. Nico Santoro stood at the head table with his back to her. He'd taken off his suit jacket. His white shirt sleeves were rolled up to his elbows, exposing forearms that looked like they'd been carved from stone. His shoulders rose and fell with measured breaths. The crushed phone dangled from his right hand. Screen shattered, pieces falling to the floor in a quiet rain of glass and circuit board. The silence terrified her more than shouting would have. Elena knew what came next. She'd seen this pattern before, the controlled breathing, the way Nico's left hand kept opening and closing into a fist. Men disappeared after nights like this. Sometimes they came back with broken fingers and new loyalties. Sometimes they never came back at all. Her eyes dropped to the table in front of him. The plate sat untouched. A perfectly cooked steak, medium rare, exactly how he always ordered it, roasted vegetables arranged with care, a glass of red wine that nobody had drunk. The meal had been sitting there for 20 minutes growing cold while Nico took calls and made decisions. Elena had noticed this pattern months ago. Nico never ate before making the kind of decisions that changed people's lives. He'd sit, he'd stare at the food, then he'd stand up, leave the table, and someone would end up in the Chicago River. She should leave. Walk through that kitchen door, clock out, go home to her studio apartment and pretend she'd seen nothing. That's what the other waitresses would do. That's what any reasonable person would do. But Elena had spent her entire life watching people make terrible decisions on empty stomachs. Her father had screamed at her mother every night after working double shifts without eating. Her brother had picked fights at school during exam season when he'd skipped lunch to study. Hunger made people cruel, made them reckless. Made them choose violence when patience would have worked better. She set the tray down on a nearby table. The sound seemed impossibly loud. Nico didn't turn around. Elena's legs felt like they'd been filled with concrete. Each step across that marble floor took an act of will. Her hands shook. Her heart hammered so hard she could feel it in her throat. Every survival instinct she possessed screamed at her to stop, to turn around, to save herself. But she kept walking. 3 feet away from him she stopped, close enough to smell gunpowder residue and expensive cologne, close enough to see the veins standing out on his forearms, close enough to die if he decided she'd crossed a line. Eat first, kill later. The words came out quieter than she'd intended, barely more than a whisper. But in that silent room they might as well have been shouted. Nico Santoro turned his head, not his body, just his head. Slowly, deliberately, the way a wolf turns to look at something that's made a fatal mistake, his eyes locked on hers. Elena had never truly seen his eyes before. She'd looked at the floor, at the walls, at his shoulder or his chin, never directly at his eyes. Now she couldn't look away. They were dark, almost black in the dim light, cold in a way that had nothing to do with temperature and everything to do with the things those eyes had witnessed. She could see the calculation happening behind them, the assessment, friend or threat, useful or disposable, live or die. For 5 seconds nobody breathed, then Nico Santoro picked up his fork. He cut a piece of steak, put it in his mouth, chewed slowly, swallowed, took a sip of wine, set the glass down with deliberate precision. Elena's knees almost gave out. She'd just done something impossibly stupid. She'd spoken to him. interrupted him, giving him advice like she had any right to exist in his world. She'd stepped out of the shadows and into the light, and there was no going back to being invisible. Not now, not ever. Nico picked up his phone with his free hand, or what was left of it. He pressed buttons with his thumb, somehow making the broken screen respond. He typed something, sent it, set the phone down. Then he looked at Elena again, really looked at her this time, like he was seeing her for the first time despite the fact that she'd been serving him dinner twice a week for half a year. "What's your name?" His voice sounded nothing like she'd expected. No rage, no violence, just curiosity wrapped in something that might have been respect. "Elena," she whispered. "Elena Ruiz." Nico nodded once. "Cut!" Another piece of steak. "You just changed 3 death sentences to conversations, Elena Ruiz. I hope you understand what that means." She didn't, but she would. Elena took 3 steps backward before her training kicked in. Don't turn your back on danger. Keep your eyes low but your awareness high. Move slowly. Make yourself small. Her hands found the empty tray on the table where she'd set it down. Muscle memory. 6 months of carrying trays had made the weight feel natural in her palms, like armor she could hide behind. She lifted it to chest height, the universal signal of a waitress at work. Nothing to see here, just doing my job. Completely unremarkable. The kitchen door stood 20 feet away. 20 feet between her and safety, between visibility and the shadows where she belonged. Elena had learned to disappear long before she walked through the steel door of Valenti's private dining club for the first time. Growing up in a house where attention meant trouble, she'd mastered the art of existing without being noticed. When her father came home angry from the factory, Elena made herself small. When her mother picked fights over unpaid bills, Elena became furniture. When her older brother brought home friends who looked at her too long, Elena learned to leave rooms without anyone noticing she'd gone. Being forgettable kept you safe. Being invisible kept you alive. The job posting had appeared on a bulletin board at the community college where Elena took night classes. No experience necessary. Cash pay. Discretion required. She'd called the number. A woman with a smoker's voice told her to show up at an address in an alley off West Roosevelt Road at 8 o'clock. Wear black. Bring nothing. Elena had shown up. The woman behind the bar looked her up and down for maybe 5 seconds, then pushed an apron across the counter. "You start tonight. Keep your head down and your mouth shut. Girls who follow those rules make good money here. Girls who don't end up wishing they had." That woman was Gianna, 50 years old, with bleached blonde hair and lipstick that never quite stayed inside the lines. She'd been working at Valenti's for 15 years, which in this place might as well have been a Lifetime Achievement Award. "Silent girls survive," Gianna had told Elena during her first shift. Voice low while they folded napkins in the supply closet. "The curious ones disappear. You seem like a silent girl to me. Good. Stay that way." Eleanor had nodded. She understood the assignment. Valenti's had rules nobody wrote down but everyone knew. Never make eye contact with the people in the back room. Never ask what's in the bags that get handed under tables. Never remember faces. Never repeat conversations you overhear. Never wonder why someone stops showing up. The club paid her 4 times what she made at her previous waitressing job. Cash, handed to her in an envelope at the end of every shift. No taxes. No questions. No paper trail connecting her to anything that happened inside those walls. Elena excelled at the work because she'd spent 23 years learning to do exactly what Valenti's required. Be invisible. Notice nothing. Remember no one. Except Elena did notice. She couldn't help it. Not people. She trained herself to forget faces the moment customers left. But patterns were different. Patterns were safe. Patterns were just data. Numbers and rhythms and behaviors that repeated until they became predictable. She noticed when tensions rose before words were spoken. The way shoulders tightened. How conversations got quieter right before they got dangerous. She learned to read a room the way meteorologists read storm systems, sensing pressure changes before the lightning struck. She noticed when glasses were empty before customers realized they wanted refills. When someone glanced toward the exit, she'd already cleared a path through nearby tables. When voices started to rise, she'd positioned herself near the kitchen door, ready to vanish. Her invisibility became an asset. Nobody watched the waitress. Nobody thought about her presence. So nobody guarded their tells around her. That's how she started noticing Nico Santoro's patterns. He came in twice a week, always Tuesday and Friday nights. Always the same table in the back corner with a clear view of both entrances. Always ordered the same meal: steak, medium rare, roasted vegetables, red wine, water with no ice. And he never finished eating before making his important calls. Eleanor had served him at least 40 times over 6 months. She'd watched him take maybe 3 bites, then push the plate aside. His jaw would tighten, his shoulders would square. He'd stand up and walk to the private room in the back, leaving a full meal to go cold on the table. 20 minutes later, someone in the dining room would get a text. They'd leave quickly. By morning, Chicago News would report another incident nobody could trace back to anything. Elena noticed the pattern because patterns were all she allowed herself to see. This had nothing to do with curiosity about Nico Santoro. She didn't wonder about his life, didn't speculate about his business, didn't think about him at all outside the context of empty plates and uneaten food. But the pattern stuck in her mind because she'd seen it before. Her father making terrible decisions on an empty stomach. Her brother starting fights when he'd skipped meals. Her mother screaming about money at midnight when she'd forgotten to eat dinner. Hunger made people volatile. Made them choose the harshest option when a softer one might work better. Made them burn bridges they'd later wish they'd kept standing. The words that came out of her mouth tonight were instinct, not bravery. The same instinct that made her step between her parents during fights, holding out a sandwich and saying, "Eat something first, please." Sometimes it worked. Sometimes they ate. Sometimes the fight dissolved into tired silence instead of thrown plates and slammed doors. Sometimes it didn't work. Sometimes her intervention made things worse. She'd find out soon enough which category tonight fell into. Elena had almost reached the kitchen door when his voice cut through the silence. "Come back here." 3 words. Quiet, calm, completely terrifying. She froze. The tray in her hand suddenly weighed 1,000 pounds. Every instinct screamed at her to keep walking, pretend she didn't hear, disappear into the kitchen and out the back exit and never come back. But people who ran from Nico Santoro didn't get very far. Elena turned around slowly. Her eyes went to the floor out of habit, but something made her lift them, made her look at where he sat at his table, fork and knife resting on the edge of his plate. His meal was half finished now, the wine glass sat empty. He gestured to the chair across from him. Not a request. A command delivered with a movement of his hand. Elena's legs moved before her brain caught up. She walked back across that marble floor, each step feeling like she was walking toward a cliff edge. The tray trembled in her hands. As she got closer, she noticed something. The red lights of security cameras throughout the room. She'd never paid attention to them before, never thought about who might be watching on the other end. Now every single camera had rotated. Every lens pointed directly at her. 40 pairs of electronic eyes tracking her movement across an empty room toward a man who could erase her existence with a phone call. Elena set the tray down on a nearby table and remained standing. Sitting felt too familiar, too dangerous. Nico Santoro looked up at her. His expression gave nothing away. "Tell me something, Elena Ruiz. How long have you been watching me?" Nico Santoro had killed his first man at 17. Learned the lesson his father taught every morning over breakfast. Hesitation gets you buried. Swift action keeps you breathing. The moment you suspect betrayal, you eliminate it. No trials, no second chances, no mercy. 20 years later, that philosophy had built an empire. Tonight, it might have been wrong. He watched Elena Ruiz walk back across his dining room, her steps careful and measured. The waitress who'd somehow become visible after 6 months of being a ghost. The girl who'd whispered words that were still echoing in his skull like a song he couldn't shake. Eat first. Kill later. 5 words that arrived 60 seconds too late. The hit was already ordered. Tommy Ricci had the address. Bruno and 3 others were already en route to the warehouse on South Halstead, where Sal Corvino thought he was safe. By midnight, Corvino and his brother would be corpses floating in the Chicago River, weighted down with chains and regret. That's how this worked. That's how it had always worked. Sal Corvino had been skimming shipments for 8 months. 8 months of stealing from Nico's operations. Small amounts at first, a few thousand here, a few thousand there. Amounts that might have gone unnoticed if Sal hadn't gotten greedy, but thieves always get greedy. That's what makes them thieves. Tommy had brought Nico the evidence 3 hours ago, shipping manifests that didn't match delivery receipts, cash that disappeared between point A and point B, security footage that showed Sal redirecting trucks to locations that weren't on any official route. 8 months of betrayal, roughly $200,000 stolen, money Nico could afford to lose, which somehow made the betrayal worse. Sal hadn't stolen out of desperation. He'd stolen because he thought Nico wouldn't notice, thought he could get away with it. Thought loyalty was optional when nobody was watching. The money was insulting. The disrespect was unforgivable. But that's not what made Nico crush his phone in his fist. The real damage came in the second part of Tommy's report. Sal Corvino had sold information to a federal task force. Names, locations, shipment schedules. 3 of Nico's operations had been compromised. 5 men were arrested last week in raids that happened simultaneously across Chicago. 5 men who were now sitting in cells, waiting to see if they'd stay loyal or start talking. Federal involvement changed everything. Local cops could be managed, judges could be influenced. But when the federal government put resources behind an investigation, people who thought they were untouchable started making deals, started naming names, started burying everyone around them to save themselves. Sal Corvino had opened a door that would take years to close, maybe longer. Nico's reputation had been built on 2 principles that every person in his world understood. Loyalty would be rewarded beyond measure. Betrayal would be answered with absolute consequences. Swift, brutal, public enough that everyone got the message. He'd made the call to Tommy while standing at this table staring at a meal he couldn't taste. His voice had been calm when he gave the order. Corvino and his brother, tonight. Make it clear what happens when someone steals from me and sells my people to federal agents. Tommy hadn't questioned it. Nobody questioned Nico's decisions. That's what 20 years of consistent action earned you. Trust, fear, respect. The 3 pillars that kept an empire standing. Nico had hung up the phone. Felt the rage building in his chest like pressure behind a dam. He'd wanted to throw something, break something, drive to that warehouse himself and put a bullet in Sal Corvino's skull personally.